and get started. Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us today for another episode of the Jane Irrigation Training Series. And I'm Richard Restuccia, Vice President, Water Management Solutions, and your host today. And today we are going to be talking about planting bare root fruit trees. And this is actually a practice I started a few years ago and really had a positive experience from it. And I was really excited to hear that Andy Belingheri was going to join us today and talk about this, because there's a certain amount of process you have to implement here to be really successful in this process. But Andy's, great to talk about this. He's 20-year landscape experienced professional. He's the national sales manager for Jane Irrigation. But Andy's experience goes back long before Jane. Andy's was a horticulture major at BYU. A few years ago, I had dinner with one of Andy's professors at BYU, and boy, he said only glowing things about you, Andy. So you really did shine in that program. Andy and I both worked for Valley Crest. Andy starting working the crews, managing crews out in the field, moving up to a business developer, and then now, national sales manager at Jane. It's quite a stellar career in landscape. The other thing, and irrigation, the other thing that's great about Andy, though, is he really has a passion for landscape, plants, trees, and that comes through in all his trainings. And that's why I'm so glad Andy's here today. So Andy, welcome. Thanks for joining us again.
I'm glad to be here, as always. Thank you.
Yeah, Andy, a few years ago when I first bought some bare root plants, when they arrived on my doorstep, I thought, oh man, I just paid a ton in shipping for a bunch of dead sticks. I was definitely, from Missouri at the time. I got to see if this actually works, show me that it works. And the result was actually very good. And I'm always amazed when I get them. I got some bare root roses a few weeks ago, planted them already, but it works, it happens. And why does it? I mean, why does what looks like a dead plant turn into a live plant in a very short period of time?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing is the plant is definitely alive, and those cells within the plant, from the root to the end of the tip, those cells are full of energy. Those little buds, those little cells are they're energized and they're ready to go. And a quick example of why this works is there's a plant. It's called forsythia. When I was in college, an old timer, a guy we were renting an apartment from, said, "Hey, cut a few twigs off that forsythia bush." And forsythia is kind of a caney flowering shrub. He said, "Cut some of those canes off, take them inside, put them in a flower vase with water, and watch what happens." Well, a few days later, every single one of those twigs, it had just swollen buds at the time. Every single one of those buds had burst into beautiful yellow flowers. They stayed that way for, I don't know, a few days, maybe a week, and then they kind of faded. Their energy reserves were left out, or were gone, right? And it was cut off from the root, and it petered out. Well, that same principle is true with fruit trees. In fact, I've got a peach tree in my backyard, and when I pruned that several weeks ago, I thought, well, I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to try with this forsythia, see the same thing. And I cut some of these twigs. And these are twigs about the size of a pencil, maybe skinnier, but they were loaded with buds, and the buds were, starting to swell. And I put them in a vase and brought them inside, and it took several days, but every single one of the buds burst. And I had a lot of leaf buds bursting, but there was also some flower buds bursting as well. And that just shows you that the energy, that stored energy that's in that those cells and those twigs, as long as it's not dead, it's alive. It's just waiting for the right conditions to carry out its biological activity.
Yeah, very cool. I bet your kids love that too.
Yeah, it was cool. Well, see, they finally burst right before Valentine's Day, and they were quickly replaced with other flowers. I got rid of those. They didn't quite suffice as the Valentine's Day bouquet.
Very nice. Well, Andy, we're really excited to learn some more about this, and I love that you're going to share with us some tips and tricks to be really successful at doing this.
Yeah. And I think I'll start with this. I just picked a picture. I wanted a picture showing why do we grow fruit trees, right? Well, we want to harvest the fruit. And I thought this was a great picture, a basket full of apples. And look at the size of the apples on the tree. And I'm sitting there looking at that, and it just dawned on me. Here's a mistake I make. It seems like every year, maybe this year I'll finally learn this tree. This is a dwarf variety. But I look at the size of the apple, and it dawns on me that was somebody did a very good job of thinning those out when they say thin the fruit when it's about the size of a thumbnail. Somebody did a really good job. These you get greedy and you think, well, I want a fruit every 2 inches, and you end up with a small flavorless fruit. But somebody did a really good job here. I thought I'd just point that out. Maybe everybody out there already knows that, but maybe there's people like me that have to learn that lesson the hard way a few years in a row. So remember to thin. But that's not the topic today. The topic is bare root, and I thought I'd start with just kind of the definition of bare root. What is a bare root tree? And you see this picture here on the right. Believe it or not, the roots are on the bottom and the twigs are on top. But bare root trees are they're just exactly that. They are bare root. They are trees that are dug out of the ground. The soil is taken off the roots, and they're sold that way. And those trees, and this happens when they're dormant. If you did this when the tree was actively growing, you'd have a different outcome. But because it's dormant and it's storing a lot of this energy, it makes it a lot easier to transplant the tree. So you can get this tree bare root, and you can plant it directly into the ground. And you don't have to worry about manipulating a heavy container of soil that the tree's growing in. And these trees, when you get them bare root, they have been growing in a nursery environment for a couple of years. I think my guess is probably 2 to 3 years. So they're good size, they're full of vigor, and they're ready to take off once they're planted. Now, bare root fruit trees, there's a reason why people do it. There's some clear advantages of choosing bare root fruit trees. I listed just a couple of them here. One of them is there's a greater variety and larger selection of trees. In this picture on the right, this is how you'd find them when they show up to your nursery. They are in bins full of sawdust, and the sawdust is there just to keep the roots moist. You can't let the roots dry out. But you see how many of those trees they can get into a small area. So that allows the nursery to carry a greater variety, a greater selection than they would otherwise have with containerized plant material. And because those trees are being shipped from the grower like that, they can be shipped very dense. You can get a lot more trees per truckload, and that reduces shipping costs. And because you don't have to every year up pot or put that tree in a larger pot as it grows, there's less labor costs. So you end up with a plant material potentially is quite a bit less cost than a traditional nursery containerized product.
Well, Andy, I should be paying less for my bare root trees or my bare root roses than I should be for the potted ones.
That's a qualified yes. The cost is less. Whether you pay less, the cost to the producer is less. Whether they pass that savings on to you is another thing. But I will tell you, I worked with one of our great customers in Northern California, Harmony Farm Supply. They were able to get the tree I wanted, brought it in, and based on what I saw from them, they're passing savings on to their customer. They were great that way. So just a shout out to Patty and the team at Harmony Farm Supply for helping me. Another advantage with bare root fruit trees, you can get a larger root mass. And that ties in with that last bullet point, better performance. So I'll kind of talk about those two together. When we get in kind of the biology and physiology of plants and roots, we know that roots need oxygen to grow. That's why we aerate turf. That's why we don't want compacted soils. Some of those roots like air a little bit more than other of the roots. And so when you have a tree growing in a plastic container, and you have roots that are growing around the edges of that plastic container that are used to getting a lot of oxygen, then you drop that root ball into the ground and cover it up, right? You bury it with dirt. Those roots, maybe they're towards the bottom that we're used to growing near air on the edge of that plastic container, are now buried in a less oxygen environment. And it takes faster at times for that tree to establish. So when we plant trees bare root, they establish quicker. and they don't have to worry about going through that transplant shock or that establishment period. They can kind of hit the ground running. And then, of course, they're easier to handle because there's no heavy soil container. I mean, a bare root tree, my goodness, it probably weighs less than a pound. You put that in a 15-gallon container with some heavy wet soil, and it's pushing, 40, 50 pounds. So definite advantages. And I will mention there is just kind of a word, just to be aware of. And I don't know that's necessarily a disadvantage, but because they're bare root, as I mentioned earlier, they can only be planted during the dormant season. You can't go over to your nursery in the middle of June and expect to find a bare root tree. So you have a short window of time to actually plant these. So.
Andy, I just want to mention quickly that we do have the Q&A open today, as well as the chat. And if people have questions for you, I want to drop them in there. We really appreciate questions, and so much so today that for some good questions, we're going to be passing on some Jane t-shirts to the people that are asking the questions today. So anyway, be ready for that, Andy.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, so how do you select a bare root fruit tree? Now, I guess I'll back this up one step further. Let's start with variety. And I didn't necessarily put this on here. Check with your local cooperative extension or with the nursery expert. You can figure out what fruit varieties grow well in your area. But once you have that figured out, so for example, for me, knowing that Santa Rosa plums grow well in the Las Vegas area, and knowing that I love pluots. And for those that don't know, a pluot is a cross between an apricot and a plum. And it's a very complex cross, but the result is, in my opinion, some of the sweetest fruit I have ever tasted. And so I decided I was going to go with a 4-in-1 pluot, 4 varieties on one tree, self-pollinating. And that was a variety I wanted. So once you decide on that variety and you're looking at the bin of all these that are sitting there, which one do you choose? Well, look for a straight trunk, no curves, no bends. You want to look at the branches that are on the tree. They should be evenly spaced, consistent growth rate, radiating in all directions. And we'll talk about that in a few slides about why radiating in all directions becomes important. Make sure there's no tree wounds, make sure it wasn't, you didn't fall off the truck and get dinged on a piece of metal and you have some damage, there. So inspect that, pull it out of the sawdust, look at the roots, make sure the roots look vigorous and healthy. They should be radiating in all directions as well. And, one practice that's common with bare root fruit trees, a lot of companies will, you can order your bare root tree from them and they'll ship it to you. And when they ship it, though, they got to make sure that root ball, those roots stay moist. They use sawdust again for that. And if that's the method it's delivered to you, when you open it up, you want to make sure that sawdust is moist and not dry. So moist and heavy, not dry and light. And those will be, if you can check each of those boxes, you should have good success.
Andy, you were pretty specific in what you wanted.
I was, yeah.
And so I am surprised that you could find a local nursery that actually had choices for that. Do you find that most local nurseries have a good selection of bare root fruit trees, or do you have to go to a special nursery? Or, what I do is I end up ordering usually.
Yeah, so I've been meaning to do this for a couple of years, and each year I was too late to the game. It was either too late in the season, or these are popular varieties and they would be sold out. And so I looked at several online retailers there to order online. It was too late. The cooperative extension here in the Las Vegas area used to have that program, but that was gone. So I couldn't order it through them. I actually went. I called up one of our Jane customers. I mentioned Harmony Farm Supply, and just happened to. I was calling about something else, and they said, "Oh, we just got a truckload of bare root trees in. We're busy right now." And I said, "Oh, do you happen to have?" And they said, "Yeah, we got 2 of them." So I said, "Hold it for me." And I took one, and I got one for my father as well to plant in his yard. So I got lucky there, but it's a good question because it does require a little advanced planning. You can't just, as I mentioned earlier, you can't wake up Saturday morning and say, I'm going over to the nursery, I'm going to get this. It's something you plan in advance for, order in advance, and you'll have a lot better luck. That's not to say that you won't get it, but a little advanced planning, advanced ordering, you can get what you want when you want it.
Yeah. So Andy, we've got a great question right now, and it has to do with how long can I keep these bare root fruit trees alive before I plant them in the ground? So I get them, how soon before I plant them? How much time do I have? I don't know if you're going to cover that on a slide or if you want to take that right now.
No, I'll take it now. I'm sure that there are people who are out there who could say, oh, I've kept it for a month and it worked just fine. What I learned in preparing for this, that was one of the things I thought, because it really depends on the area you're in. Here in Vegas, and I'll show this in the presentation, there is such a small window of when the tree is ready and you can plant it and when the buds start breaking and it starts growing. So now out in areas where buds aren't breaking until April, you might have a longer period of time. But I would recommend, if you get it in, first recommendation is be ready to plant it when it comes in. Second recommendation, say your ground is frozen, you have to wait. They say you can store it in a garage, shed. If it's not too cold, maybe the north side of the building. But you want it to be in that, cool, 40, 50 degree temperature range. A lot of the mail order places say no more than a week. But I'm sure there are ways to do it. But the key is keeping that that sawdust or soil, whatever it is, keeping those roots moist. And if you can keep that and keep it out of like a hard freeze, you wouldn't want days on end of hard freeze that could damage the roots. If you can keep it in a frost-free, freeze-free, not too hot, not too cold. This is like Goldilocks, right? Not too hot, not too cold, not too wet, not too dry. You don't want those roots standing in water for a long period of time, but you don't want them to dry out in between. But I think in the right scenario, right temperature, roots moist, I see no reason why you couldn't hold it for more than a week. I mean, weeks on end, as long as the buds didn't start to break. Hopefully that answers the question.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Great question. Great answer.
Yeah. So that's a great segue into when is then the best time to plant. Remember I mentioned earlier, there is a short window of time between when these are dug out of the field, they're dormant, and between when the buds break. Now that window can be really, really short. If you're in the West, out in the desert, you may be looking at basically mid-winter, from maybe mid-December through the end of January is your only window. If you're in other climates, it could be, November, between November and March could be the window you have. But the key here is, what matters most is you got to plant the trees before those buds break, because as soon as those buds break, they're starting to use stored energy reserves. And if they exhaust those energy reserves, and you end up with a tree that is either lacks vigor or is potentially dead. But if you can get it in the ground and those roots begin to grow before those energy reserves are exhausted, you'll have a lot of success, and you can eliminate that shock to the tree that could potentially either kill it or just make it kind of a little bigger dud. So generally speaking, that's going to be fall, winter, maybe early spring if you're in that climate. But at West Coast, I think these trees come in early January. Guys are planting them before the end of January, and a lot of time those buds are breaking right now. So
Andy, a couple things here. Dave Wilson Nursery, I see you have his logo on here. We had Tom Spellman from Dave Wilson on in December. I just want to mention everybody, he's talking about backyard orchards. We have that on our trainings page still. If you want to see that later on, you can check that out as well.
Yeah, and I put that up there, again, kind of kudos to Harmony, but it was a Dave Wilson product that they brought in. And I want to say, of all the nurseries I checked with, looking at mail order places, they were all getting their product from Dave Wilson Nursery. They're a reputable group, well known across the industry for what they produce. And I love that concept though of a backyard orchard. I've got an apricot, 2 peaches, this 4-in-1 pluot, and a pomegranate in my backyard. My backyard's not very big, but there's between dwarf varieties and so a little bit of experimenting. Backyard orchard, or what I like to call it an edible landscape, is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. So
Tom Spellman's point in December was, grow what you like to eat.
yes,
You're going to put the time into it, you might as well enjoy eating it.
and just this morning for breakfast, I had a peanut butter and jam sandwich, and it was peach jam that we made from the peaches off our peach tree. So we like jam, we like peaches, hence the the peach tree, and now pluot. We love pluots. Questions. I know there's always questions specifically to this or that in my area. I always like to recommend talk to the nurseries that you're buying from. They should have an expert on staff, or contact a cooperative extension or master gardener. Those are always great resources to help guide you. What works, what doesn't, time of year, other things like that. So just a good reminder that those resources are there. They're valuable. So, I mentioned this short window. This is the pluot tree that I planted end of January, and this happened several weeks ago. It was, blossoms were already starting to break. So it really is a short period of time in the ground, planted, and then boom, buds are breaking, and this thing is ready to rock and roll. So just a visual demonstration of how quickly and how short that window can be.
Wow, those beautiful buds there. That's excellent photo. Thank you.
So I want to get some tips here. We'll go through some pre-planting tips, planting tips, and then some post-planting tips, and we'll talk about some of the kind of first year as you're getting these trees established. Pre-planting tips. I mentioned this. There was a question on that. If you can't plant the tree immediately, keep the sawdust moist, or keep it covered in something that can keep it moist and protect it from freezing. Garage or shed is ideal. North side of a building can work as well, as long as it's not below freezing. These are kind of basics. Having a site that's full sun with space for the tree to grow is going to be ideal. And space is relative, right? I mean, it doesn't have to take up a 30-foot by 30-foot space. You can do an espalier. You could do there's some creative pruning that look artistic, but also will produce fruit. So be creative with your space. Just make sure that typically 6 to 8 hours of full sun is what's required. And also this gets into checking with your the experts in your area. You need to find out for fruit trees if you need a pollinator. Is it self-pollinating, or do you need a pollinator nearby? So one of the recommendations as well is, even though these roots are coming in moist sawdust, putting them in a bucket of water for 1 to 24 hours and letting them rehydrate will ensure success. You don't want to go any more than 24 hours. You start to cut off oxygen supply, and that can be detrimental. But hydrating the roots right before planting is a good idea. In fact, stick it in a bucket of water, then go dig your hole. Is probably a good step to follow. And speaking of holes, this is going to be true for all plants you plant. Old rule of thumb: dig a hole that's wider, much wider, 2 to 3 times wider than the size of the root ball, and that's going to give the roots room and good soil to expand, but not any deeper. And we'll talk about why that becomes important. We don't want to bury the tree. And then another good pre-planting tip: now is the time. You looked at the roots, just making sure there were roots when you selected the tree, but now is the time to do a bigger visual inspection of these roots. And I've got a picture here that illustrates, this is the bare root tree I planted. And upon visual inspection, you can see right here, there was this root that was broken. It was kind of mangled. And the tree probably would have grown all right, but then you have the tree introduced. Maybe it's a way for bacteria to get in, or causes other energies to go into fixing that versus growing. So A good rule of thumb before you plant it, visually inspect the roots. If there's anything that's broken, give it a nice fresh pruning cut, just like you would up top, and it'll establish quicker and be better off. So I had that on this and gave it a quick snip, and then I was ready to plant.
Andy, one thing I know when plants that are in containers, oftentimes I'm knocking that container off and I'm pulling off, almost all the roots, right? So the bottom quarter, right, to help generate root growth. We don't necessarily want to do that, though. Is that right with these?
Yes, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, because it reminded me of one of the very important advantages of growing bare root trees. Is I'm like you, Richard. When I buy something in container, I always take the container off and I look at the roots. I want to make sure there's no girdling roots, nothing that's containerized, right? Nothing, these pot bound roots. And that's always, you can't always see that really well when something's growing in a container and soil, but with bare root, you can see that. You can see that these roots are, flaring out, and you don't have to worry about some of those issues. So yeah, with the bare root, that worry is not there. I do want to call out, and I want to define this graft union. You can see this picture right here. This graft union happens right here, and I'll explain what that is. You have a root stock, which is a different variety of plant from what they call the scion, or the variety. So what they'll do is, you can take a root stock that is maybe isn't susceptible to a certain disease, or maybe it's a dwarfing rootstock, or somehow it's better, it's stronger. And then you can take the variety you want to grow and graft it right onto that rootstock, and you can have a stronger, more healthy, better success fruit tree. Or you can take that and you can graft on 4 different varieties. You can have a fruit cocktail. I mean, there's a lot of creative things you can do, but when you get these trees, and you'll see this in containerized as well, always identify this, because this becomes important. We do not want to bury that graft union. Typically, it's going to be about 1 to 3 inches above the root flare. And the root flare here, you can see in this diagram, is nothing more than kind of where the roots flare up into the trunk, right? That's the root flare. About 1 to 3 inches above that is where that graft union is going to be, and we never want to plant the tree and have that graft union buried. If you can tell where that the original soil line is, that's ideal, but typically you want to make sure you give plenty of space in there. And that gets into some of the planting tips, but knowing what that graft union is and understanding it becomes one of the critical success factors. You don't want to make that mistake and bury it too deep and have your tree die. So then we come into the planting tips, right? We got our hole dug, we got the roots pruned up. The graft union, rule of thumb is have that facing north to avoid sun scald. Or if you have a multi-variety tree, the most dominant variety should face north as well, so it doesn't outcompete, outgrow, shade out the other varieties. Put those facing north. If depending on the soil in the area you live, if you have a gravelly desert soil, you're going to want to add some organic matter. So amend your soils. And then when you put the tree in, fan the roots out. Last thing you want is to have a root that's tucked under itself, or somehow kinked, and it starts to grow in circles, right? We want to avoid those girdled roots. Fan them out. As I mentioned before, make sure the graft union is not buried. And if you can, match the original soil line. And I didn't take a picture of when I did this, but when I planted this, I took my shovel and I laid it across from one side of the hole to the other, so I could see where that soil line would be. And in this picture here, and what I ended up doing is, after I started backfilling a little bit, I realized it was going to be a little low, so I had to kind of tug it up a little bit to bring it up to the right height. And you can see this. I just dropped a line in there, but really I wanted that soil line here and not there. So a quick way to do that, you can use a cane, you could use a shovel, but just lay that across, and you can see where that soil line is going to be. That'll help you not bury it too deep, not plant it too deep.
I love that shovel line tip, Andy, especially because I can support myself on that shovel too and hold the tree at the right level and use my other hand, right? And I'm not falling in the hole. So
That's right. Yep. So, if you are amending your soil, I'm always a fan, especially in the desert Southwest. I'm a fan of 50% compost and 50% native soil. The compost, it's amazing what compost does to bring the soil to life. So, and as I backfill, you can tamp. I've seen some people use their feet, or some people use the end of a shovel to tamp in. What I'm a fan of is creating a slurry. And that's just as you're backfilling, have the hose running, and the water, kind of that muddy slurry mix, fills in everywhere. You don't end up with air pockets, and it's a great way to make sure everything's watered well as well. And it just, in my opinion, it's less damage, better overall for the tree than tamping it in. So that slurry is a great way to do it. And if after you've done that and things settle and you look at your tree and you think, oh no, it has settled beneath the grade, you can just pull on it, give it a little bit of a tug up, and as you add a little bit more soil back in, and it will be okay.
that's a great tip. It's happened to me a few times where after you put the water in, you go, hey, that's not where I started with the tree. And so good to know I can just give it a little tug and gently tug it and get it to the right height.
Yep. So, okay. And then lastly, irrigation. You can see in my picture here, I've got some drip irrigation. You can see my Jane my super turbo PC Jane emitter back there. But I'm a fan of drip irrigation, of course. I think emitter line is a great solution. You can see this diagram on the left. You could throw a few rings around the tree. You could use a grid of emitter line. If the emitter line isn't your style, let's say you have a shrubler, a fixed flow shrubler. The other alternative is creating a moat, a very wide well to hold the water in with a berm. You want to make sure that area is as big as a drip line of the tree would be, and you can create that to hold the water above the root zone using shrubblers. So that's for irrigation. The other critical key here is you need to stake the tree, and these trees stand up just fine on their own, but we stake them to immobilize the roots. As these roots are starting to grow, and as the leaves begin to break, usually in the spring is when we have winds. And before that tree is fully established, if the winds come by and it starts rocking the tree, it can break or damage the roots. We want to stabilize those roots until they're anchored in. So that's after 1 year, then take those stakes off. That doesn't need to be staked anymore. We're just doing that to help it get established. And then of course, always add mulch, 3 to 4 inch layer of shredded bark or tree chippings or whatever your flavor is. That mulch layer becomes critical as well.
Andy, we got another question coming in, and it has to do with your diagram here on the left, the tree rings.
Yes.
What do you do when the tree gets bigger? Now you've got these small rings around the tree. What do you do about that?
Okay, 2 solutions. First is you can anticipate the full size of the tree and put enough rings at planting time, and the roots will grow out there well before the tree canopy gets out there. Or you can come in after the fact, maybe every year, and add an additional ring as it starts to grow.
And that's somewhat simple to do.
Very simple to do. So if I had a power lock fitting, and my cursor's not working, there it is. Let's say I wanted to add an additional ring here. I could cut right here, take a T, put that T in, one on either side, point it out that way, put my 12 or 18 inch piece of pipe, and then with another T, I could add that additional ring, and it would take just a few minutes. It's a piece of cake. I've done it before. It's really not that bad.
Yeah, that's pretty easy. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. If it were me though, I would probably I'd get it out there at least 75% of where I think the mature tree root zone would be. I'd do that up front. Partly because I think it's less work, but more importantly, because those roots, within a year or two, those roots will fill that area. Even before the top of the tree catches up, those roots will get there. So, and we're growing these trees for, we want them to live, we want them to produce fruit, right? We're not doing it for fun. So let's give it the best chance to survive. All right, post planting. A couple, so you got the tree in there. There's a couple things we got to do. First one is we got to do some pruning to the tree itself. It typically is not going to come pruned ready to go. A good rule of thumb is you want to reduce the overall height by at least 1/3. Before these trees, when these trees were dug, before they were shipped to the nursery, some of those roots were pruned off. Nothing on top was pruned, so you can reduce that a little bit to put it in balance. But more importantly, what we're trying to do is establish a structure of how we want this tree to look. Now that can be different for every person, which is why they're not pruned before they're sent out as well. If you are if you don't want to have a ladder and you want everything to be able to be reached by the ground, you're going to cut that lower. They say maybe between your knee and waistline. Make that first cut lower, and then start to get your scaffolding branches to start coming out lower. Or, depending on the height, or, just, it really depends on your circumstance, but you want to do some thinning cuts to establish your scaffold branches. You want to start to establish a vase shape, keep that center open. And once that's done, we got the smaller twigs that we want to start doing some heading cuts on. So if I have and you can see in this diagram here on the right, if this branch right here that comes up on the far right, if I did not want that to interfere with branches above, and I wanted it to kind of force more outward growth, and if you can see my cursor just disappeared. There we go. If I cut right here, right above that branch, all this growth would be forced outward. And so I can use those heading cuts to force the direction I want the tree to grow in. If I did that to a bud that was faced inward, I'd face that growth inward. Then we wouldn't want that, right? We'd want it outward. So that some of that pruning, I got a picture of that here. So picture on the left is the tree just planted. Picture on the right, I made some cuts. I reduced the overall height, and then I made some heading cuts to begin to tell the tree how I want it to grow, which direction I want it to grow, and begin to establish the overall shape. I do that work now so that in 5-10 years from now, that shape is established. I'm not fighting with branches growing in areas I don't want them to. And I'll go back to this other picture here. You see this a lot in orchards. You see these trees painted white. I remember a long time ago, I used to think, well, that was just a silly practice. People thought that looked good. Man, that's such nice. Or why would they do that? And then I learned they do that to protect the branch from sun scald. And they'll use a 50-50 water with white latex paint mixture, and they'll paint the trunk of the tree. And that keeps the trunk from burning, and it burns up, and it literally it disintegrates. When that happens, you get borers, and some of these other insects can come in and kill your trees. So you do this to protect the tree from sun scald and insects. Another, this is a little practice I picked up along the way, and you can use a lot of things for it. I used an old twig that was lying around, but you use these spacers and spreaders. Sometimes you want that nice vase shape, but the branches are growing like this, and there's only so much you can do with pruning. You can take branches or wood or pieces of plastic, whatever you have, and you can use those to spread the branches out a little bit as well. I've had good success with that. I know I got this idea from a demonstration orchard up that the University of Nevada Cooperative Extension runs up in North Las Vegas. And you can do that to help maybe push some branches out and get a little bit of shape, especially when they're young. It works really well.
That's a great idea. I've not seen that before, but I really do like that. That's interesting.
Yeah. And in this picture, these two are nice V now. Before, they were coming in, at a much tighter angle, kind of in this area, about half of what it is now. So pushing those out gives me more space and better production. And we can do that. We can accomplish that in pruning as well. And I've got this diagram here on the right that shows, how we can prune first year, second year, third year to get that structure, that great vase shape and that open canopy, really maximize fruit production. We prune fruit trees differently than we prune landscape trees. Landscape trees we prune for aesthetics. We want them to look good. Fruit trees we're pruning for maximum production.
On that first year spring cut, this is what you're doing to keep the tree from getting too tall.
Too tall, and just establishing the structure, the overall structure. That would be a great cut if you wanted to not have to use a ladder. You wanted to reach everything from the ground. Cut that down low and then get those scaffold branches to start growing out, so it can be reached. Exactly opposite of what I do if that was a landscape tree. If that was a landscape tree, I would not make that cut. I'd leave that strong central leader. And those scaffold branches that are lower, I'd cut them not all the way back, but about halfway back to keep the trunk strong, to have let the tree have some growth. But over time, I'd eventually get rid of both of those and keep all the growth growing straight up. So it's kind of the exact opposite of what we do with landscape trees.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, good analogy. I like that.
And then lastly here, kind of throughout the first year, I mentioned the spacers and spreaders to help with the shape if you can't accomplish that with pruning. Remember, these are young trees. They're basically twigs. They're very pliable, so you can push them out and get the shape you want. You want to make sure you're watering them regularly, deeply, help them get established. Don't want them to dry out. This is always the toughest thing to do that first year, and I haven't done it yet. Remove the blossoms, right? Any blossoms, any fruit that grow, cut that off and let the tree put all of its energy to root and shoot production. And of all the fruit trees I've planted, I've never done that. I've always left just one or two on there just to see. But it's a recommendation that comes from a lot of people, so I'll throw it out there. Maybe if I follow it this time, it'll be like thinning my thinning the fruit as well. I'll get better production. So I'll try it. I'll report next year on how it worked. I mentioned staking the tree. We already covered that. We've covered pruning, but throughout the first year or two, you want to make sure you're really staying on top of that structural pruning to create the structure you want. And that becomes especially important. I remember several years ago, what was this, 10, 15 years ago, I ended up planting 3 trees in the same hole. And my idea was, well, I had limited space, but I could get 3 varieties by planting 3 trees closely together. Eventually, one of them just overtook the others. And then I learned, well, I could just get, these 4-in-1 or 3-in-1 trees, multi varieties on the same stock. But even then, you have to be careful. There's always going to be a variety that's dominant above the others, and you want to make sure you keep the pruning of that variety in check so that it doesn't outcompete the others. And that's going to be key. Not just the first year, but every year as well. But it's especially important during the first year, so those other varieties can get established. And the end result is, if we do it all right, in a few years we can have a tree loaded with fruit, and it makes my mouth water just looking at all that.
I'm getting really hungry right now, and I am looking forward to some pluots this summer, maybe, Andy. I'm removing the blossoms this year, so maybe in a couple summers I will share. Well, I don't know, Richard. I hope you would say that you were inspired now to go plant your own. Yeah, I do like pluots too, and I hope I haven't missed the opportunity to get them in. So gonna have to check that out here locally.
Yeah. And here's my contact information. Anybody has any questions? But I threw this picture up because, again, size and shape. You do not have to have an orchard, typical 30-foot by 30-foot area to get a fruit tree. You can put it up against a wall or a fence, or make the tree your fence with this espalier. And it's beautiful, but also it produces fruit quite well as well.
Andy, what a great final photo that you supplied there. I mean, really helps us get creative about how we're doing this, right? Because we're trying to get more, of course, we're trying to get more crop per drop, but we're also trying to get more crop in small spaces. So for all of us that are trying this urban farming and growing our own food in our backyards, this is a great example of a creative way to just grow more in these small spaces. So Thanks for the photo. And Andy, thank you. Great job today. I learned a lot from you today, and always gets me motivated to get out there and get growing. I want to say thank you to everybody who joined. We really appreciate your time and attention to this. We hope we're getting a lot out to you guys. You can see all our trainings at janesusa.com/trainings, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. I know I love the idea that people are out there in their work days listening to our podcasts, improving themselves and improving the environment as they do so. Andy, any final thoughts for our viewers?
You know what? The best way to learn is by doing. Get out and do and enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, great advice. Yeah, so thank you. Thanks for all the questions. We'll get some t-shirts out to those of you who asked. And thanks again, really appreciate it. We will we'll be back here Friday. Eric Olson, president of Jane Irrigation, is going to have a couple tips on how to reduce your nitrogen use or increase that nitrogen you're using, the efficiency of it at a time when nitrogen fertilizer prices are skyrocketing. This is something that everybody is looking to know. So be fun to see that on Friday. Thanks again, everybody. And we will talk to you all soon. Thank you.